The sixth step in the U.S. Secret Service operational guide is develop risk management options. Welcome back. I'm Holly Hollingsworth.
And I'm Kyle Anderson. Once the team has completed an assessment of a threat, it evaluates whether a student is at risk for self-harm or harming someone else. This evaluation helps the team determine which risk management options are best for each situation.
The team is not attempting to predict with certainty if violence will happen. Instead, it's trying to evaluate the presence of factors that indicate violence might be a possibility. Teams can then develop risk management strategies that reduce the student's risk for engaging in violence and make positive outcomes for the student more likely. The University of Virginia's Dr. Cornell offers a template of questions a team can use to help assemble a plan following the assessment. In a moment, Cornell will discuss risk factors for violence. First, Dr. Lena Althari of the U.S. Secret Service explains that each student who comes to the team's attention will require an individualized management plan.
It has to be individualized. There is no cookie-cutter approach to management. It really is warranted on what that kid is exhibiting, what the student's feeling, what the context is of their life, and as you said, do they have an access to weapon? Did they bring a weapon to school? Are they engaging in this really serious behavior, what they are planning something? Because if that's the case, then that management approach has to be imminent and immediate in the terms of response. But if it's less sort of imminent in terms of recent changes in behavior, or they're talking about depressive and stuff, then you want to make sure that a counselor maybe is the most appropriate approach. So it really has to be individualized to the situation.
So how do we determine that a student is violent? First of all, anybody can be violent in the right circumstances, in the right situation. I don't like the idea that there are certain people who are violent and other people who are not violent. So we're always looking at risk factors, and I'm looking at things like what have they done in the past, what is their history, what are the stresses that are impinging on them, what resources or alternatives do they have. Very often kids think that this is their only option, that they don't have any more viable options. So we look at what their assessment is of their options. And then we look at mental health needs that might be aggravating. Is there substance abuse? Is there a problem with anger? Are there stressful situations, an abusive home environment, or or gang involvement, some other situational factors that would tend to increase the risk of violence? So we're looking at the risk of violence rather than that a person is violent or is not violent.
The team should base judgments about a student's risk of violence on an analysis of behaviorally relevant facts, not traits or characteristics that might seem to pose a threat. The use of profiles can shift attention away from facts and evidence about a student, which are much more reliable. It's important that the team make judgments based on the student's behaviors and communications. There is a big difference between making a threat and posing a threat. Those that make a threat, of course, should have an intervention. However, those that pose a threat are students the team is going to need to spend a good deal of time on. Every threat should receive prompt attention, and the team should make their determinations based on facts. A major principle all threat assessment teams should have is that each investigation stands on its own. Conclusions should be guided by an analysis of facts specific to the student of concern and the given situation.
The resources and supports the student needs will differ depending on the information gathered during the assessment. Remember, the assessment is designed to document the circumstances of the threat, as well as the history and context of the student's behavior from as many perspectives as possible. Often, the team will determine that the student is not currently at risk for engaging in violence, but requires monitoring or is in need of guidance to cope with issues in their life. Resources to assist that student could take the form of peer support programs or therapeutic counseling to enhance social learning or emotional competency, perhaps life skills classes, tutoring in specific academic subjects, or mental health care. Most of these supports will be available within the school, but the team may need to access community resources to assist with helping the student.
Speaking of mental health care, let's hear again from mental health expert Jamie Hardwick, who works with the Lima City Schools in Allen County. She'll describe a case their threat assessment team dealt with and the wide-ranging risk management options that case needed. Hardwick also offers descriptions of the many resources they pull from to develop individualized management plans.
We've had some where it's just been, our team. So that consists of We have our school resource officers at the table. We have a mental health person at the table. We might have a principal. That's what our team is comprised of, and we're working with the family and then connecting them to resources. And so it might be just that's what we do, and we do check-ins and all of that. Or we have an entire team comprised of juvenile court, because maybe the student's involved with juvenile court. We may have child welfare there because there is a concern for things going on in the home. So children's services at the table. We may have the Board of Developmental Disabilities at the table because this may be a student who has a disability. We've had that. We've brought on board our Job and Family Services because the family has needed assistance. So it can be comprised of anybody that comes into contact with our students, and really looking at what is the need for each family. The biggest thing is collaboration in your community. You've got to be able to collaborate with your other agencies, your children's services, your behavioral health agencies. You've got to be able to, because not one person can do this alone. That's why you have such a diverse team at the table for threat assessment, because it's not just the school district can't do it by themselves. Mental health agencies can't do it by themselves. Children's services can't do it. It's all intertwined, and we all have to work collaboratively together to be able to serve not just the student, but the family as a whole. So we had most recently a young man present to the health center, came in for behavioral health services. So he had came in, and I was meeting with him, and he shared with me that the night before, him and mom were into a argument, verbal, that resulted in them getting physical. He held a knife to her throat. He shared with me he was very worried for her safety and what he would do to her. He also had identified multiple students within the building that he was going to harm. He was also suicidal and identified very detailed ways of what he was going to do to hurt himself, including 3 different ways within the school building that he could use to kill himself. This obviously was concerning, so we had our school resource officer transport him to the crisis center. We were hesitant to bring mom on board just right away because the concern was her presence going to agitate him more, which I feel like it would have. So he was transported to the crisis center to be assessed. We had contacted the crisis center to say, hey, this is what's coming. This is what we're worried about. And then we contacted mom. And at that time, mom, she said, yes, he beat me up last night. He held a knife to my throat. I'm very scared. She did not call law enforcement. So I contacted law enforcement to say, this is what occurred. I am very worried about her safety. This student has been very detailed in what he may do to her. So called law enforcement to bring them on board and to also let them know he was at the crisis center. They may call you if he gets too agitated or if mom shows up there, because she was wanting to go there. No matter how much we expressed the safety concern. We also contacted Children's Services to say we're worried about the safety of him and her and whoever else may be in the home. So he ended up being hospitalized. Children's Services did get involved, and so they have a case manager who is able to provide safety planning in the home. And then as a threat assessment team, we all came together because when he returned to school, he had made comments to a teacher, and a teacher had overheard and was concerned. So we also made contact with our local community mental health agency because he established care there and was seeing psychiatric care there as well. So we notified them and the psychiatrist to say, hey, these are some concerning behaviors that we're worried about. He's also stated that, medication isn't working, that kind of stuff. So multiple people had to get involved at that point because not only the safety of the students and the staff that he also identified, but mom and then even community. This young man in particular that I was talking about was very involved in school activities, extracurricular activities. He was involved in Boy Scouts, and he was working towards his Eagle Scout award, and so he was worried that all that was going to be jeopardized. So taking all those things away from him could have even made the situation worse. So I think, yes, there are times where we need to maybe look at removing a student until we can get all those things in place that need to be put in place. Working closely with community mental health to know, okay, do you feel that he's stabilized or she's stabilized? For them to return to school. And then what does that return to school look like? What safety planning are we doing inside the school? And who does that include? So I think that removing the student, yes, it's an option, but it doesn't take away the threat.
Hardwick makes an important point. Removing a student is one risk management option. However, the team and school administration should consider how it might affect their ability to monitor the student. Removing a student from school does not eliminate the risk to the school. A student can still make or pose a threat, and school attacks have been carried out by former students who had been removed. In fact, a suspended or expelled student might become isolated from positive interactions or supportive relationships they have at school. Teams should develop strategies to stay connected to a suspended or expelled student to better determine if their situation is getting worse or if the concerning behaviors are escalating. The individualized management plan for that student remains in place until the team is no longer concerned about the student or the risk for violence.
One way of evaluating the student's risk is to conduct a mental health assessment. The purpose of a mental health assessment is to keep the student who is being assessed safe, as well as keeping any potential victims safe. A mental health assessment is certainly called for when a student poses a very serious substantive threat of violence. In fact, because of the risk of violence in that situation, the mental health assessment should take place as soon as possible after the threat is reported. This assessment should be done by a school mental health professional, or find one externally if the school doesn't have one. When a threat presents immediate safety needs, the mental health assessment can start without parents' permission, but the parents should be notified as soon as possible to obtain permission for further assessment.
In a moment, Marlington Local School Superintendent Knoll discusses a situation in which a mental health assessment was called for. But first, let's go back to Jamie Hardwick for another example, this one of a fight at school, physical violence. However, it was rooted in a mental health issue. And though the law enforcement members of the threat assessment team got involved, the team ultimately selected risk management options focused on mental health treatment instead.
But we had a recent example. We had a student who got into an argument with another student because the other student disclosed some very personal information that this young man had shared with him. And so he was very upset, obviously. And so it escalated between the two to them almost getting into a fight. And then it escalated to staff getting involved and things like that, and the staff threatened. So this student from somewhere in the building called the police. He had a very close relationship with one of the detectives. Called the detective to say, I'm suicidal. So the detective said, I'm sending law enforcement. So in that meantime, though, there was an interaction between another staff person, and so it escalated. And I happened to be out of the building at a meeting, but I had a very good relationship with this young man. So my staff called me and said, Jamie, something's going on. So I get back to the building. He's outside, and he's hiding in trees. And so I come around the corner, and he's crying. And at that point, law enforcement shows up, but it's not the detective that he called. And so he gets scared, because he's had run-ins with law enforcement before. He gets scared, and he's like, I'll run. And I'm like, nope, let's just take care of this. What's going on? What's wrong? And so he comes towards me. And so then law enforcement's thinking, and so I'm like, stand down, I got this. And he's like, Jamie, he told everybody I was sexually abused. He told everybody. And so he just starts crying. And so at this point, 4 more law enforcement show up. And so we're in the middle of the street, and we're surrounded by law enforcement, and our school resource officer comes out. And I'm like, hold on, just everybody hold on. Because I knew if he got spooked, it was gonna end up bad. He was probably gonna end up in jail, maybe tased if they felt threatened. And so I'm like, just hold on, please, let me. And we were able to calm him down. He was fine with the school resource officer to come over. So we all, and were able to talk to him and end up getting him the help that he needed.
Yeah, a couple years ago, Stark County in general was having a really hard time. We had a lot of social media threats going around through the county. And through that process, we got word in Marlington that we had a student post something that was inappropriate. And it was. I mean, we talked to people we needed to talk to. We got the information we needed. So this whole process kind of kicked into place. I mean, we were able to find some things online. We were able to find where this individual had done searches for like how to get weapons. It was pretty in depth, and it was a little shocking to our folks because it was the first time really that we had to deal with something of that magnitude. But the flip side of that is the positive that came out of it. All right, so we had a mental health assessment done. An individual definitely has some needs, but we were able to connect him with the right help. My job as superintendent isn't to throw kids out of school. It's if you have some warning signs and you need help, my job is to give you the help. And this young man has some consequences, don't get me wrong, but through the team and through that mental health piece, he's back and doing well, which to me, I'd hope we'd have got there without some of the stuff in place, but I don't think we would have had the good conversations that we had and maybe some of the things in place to help him be successful. I'm not sure we'd have had that initially like we did when we went through this threat assessment piece. So that was huge for us.
Threat assessment teams have many risk management options. Intervention can be done in many different ways. The team must look at each situation to determine the possible actions and most productive method for obtaining a positive outcome. These could include monitoring the situation, counseling, school discipline, citation or arrest, or referral to an outside agency. In most cases, the most effective intervention for a student is a caring and qualified adult. Always document the action taken and the reason why. Let's turn to school resource officers Chad Smith in Stark County and John Gleason in Hilliard with 2 more examples of the individuality of risk management options and interventions.
Yeah, like an issue at home. We had an issue with a young lady last night who was having an issue at home with her mother. Talked to the counselor, talked to the principal, talked to the children's services about this young lady and what's going on at home. We decided the best course would be to take her home and actually physically see what's going on at the home. At that point, Children's Services removed that young lady from the home, along with her 2 siblings, because of what was going on in the home. That was just us gathering, in a quick threat assessment team, hearing some of the facts about what was going on, and actually going out and seeing for ourselves what was going on with this young lady and her family, so that we can get her help and her family help.
Most recently, this was one that was handled administratively this week. Kid who was FaceTiming with his girlfriend, been upset, made some comments to her while FaceTiming that were threatening in nature to the point where she took it and didn't come to school the next day. We got the call from mom after mom talked to her, hey, why didn't you go to school? Got back to the student, and in talking with him, the administrators, his parent, guardian, found out exactly what all's going on in his world. I mean, there's an anniversary of a death in the family that came up. There's contact from biological parent who has had no contact with him that has stirred up a lot of emotion and angst with the young man, and it became more of the need to reach out for help, encouragement, and accessibility to counseling, as well as letting the parent or the guardian in this case know he's struggling with these other factors, and getting them back into his regular counseling session. And that's where, I mean, it's a balancing act.
Coming up next, Step 7, create and promote safe school climates.